On September 29, 1957, a nuclear waste site near the Kyshtym plutonium processing plant exploded, contaminating 9,000 square miles of land. This would go on to be the third worst nuclear disaster in history. Kyshtym industrial complex and the plutonium processing plant and nuclear reactors held within were built in the late 1940s as part of the Soviet program to develop nuclear weapons known as the Soviet Atomic Bomb Project. The secret nuclear facility was known under the code name Chelyabinsk 40. The nuclear facility was stood on the eastern slopes of the Ural Mountains, near to lakes from which they used the water to cool the reactors, as well as using the lake itself as a repository for the nuclear waste created there. The conditions of the plant and the technology used there were rushed and unsafe both for the workers and the neighbors of the facility. The direct cause of the disaster was a malfunction in the cooling system to the buried tank number 14, containing the liquid nuclear waste from the plant. The malfunction was never repaired and the heat inside the tank steadily grew over more than a year until reaching a temperature of around 660 degrees Fahrenheit or 350 degrees Celsius by September 29, 1957. Tank number 14 exploded with a force equivalent to 70 tons of TNT. The explosion blew off the 1-meter thick concrete lid and sent a plume of radioactive fallout, of which 91% was cerium-144 and zirconium-95. The long-lived strontium-90 was only around 2.7% of the fallout, but was still responsible for the long-term radiological hazards within the Ural Mountain area, known as the radioactive trail. The amount dispersed was approximately 2 million curies of nuclear waste. This was about 2/5 of what Chernobyl would later release. The fallout plume would drift northwest into areas of hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens, like Berdyanish, Sotlikov, Galikiv, Abuga, Karabalka, and Yugokaneva. The authorities were slow to order evacuation. In the following months, hospitals in the areas near Kyshtym were filled with those suffering from radiation sickness. The area near Kyshtym had an increased cancer rate, deformity rate, and other major health problems. Since 1957, the population of the East Ural radioactive trails has been subject to medical examination and treatment by the Clinic of Urals Research for Radiation Medicine. The first medical examinations of Berdyanish, Sotlikov, and Galikiv, the settlements closest to the explosion site, were conducted on the first days and weeks after the accident. These medical examinations were conducted by the Mayak PA hospital physicians. Children in the highest exposure dose group were found to have increased chances of catching infectious disease such as pertussis, measles, mumps, acute upper respiratory infections, bronchitis, pharyngitis, as well as acute skin infections. 1,107 of the 21,427 of the areas affected died due to cancer. The food supply for the area was affected as well. From September 1957 to April 1958, the strontium-90 in people's diets was 3,395 becquerels. According to the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, the amount of becquerels in the average American fresh vegetable is 0.3. Even today, it is hundreds of times higher than most places. In 2011, it was measured at 135 becquerels, 450 times higher than the average vegetable in the US. Information about the disaster is scarce, especially those coming from the time it occurred. The disaster being a part of a secret program led to it being kept secret for years. The Soviet Union denied the disaster until 1989, almost 32 years later. Even then, the Soviet Union downplayed the severity of the disaster. The news of the disaster didn't hit the Western mainstream till almost 18 years after the accident. In 1976, when an exiled Soviet biologist, Zhores Medvedev, reported on it for the British journal New Scientist. Even when it hit the Western mainstream, many news sources had incorrect facts or fudged numbers that made the disaster seem much less severe than it was. The Kyshtym disaster was one of negligence and the side effects of a program rushed to meet timelines set in place. And as most nuclear disasters, it was not a problem on behalf of the nuclear power itself, but it not being taken care of. The fallout has wreaked havoc on those who lived and continue to live in the rural areas surrounding it. The legacy of Kyshtym will be remembered as one of the most forgotten and unknown nuclear disasters ever recorded.